Giant hawk. Giant hawk.
Aloha, and welcome to this week's video. So this week is going to be a little bit longer of a video, just because I was going to make this into two segments, but I don't have any testing at the end, so I thought I'd just put it into one video. What I'm going to be making this week is a fish hook war club. So this is a Hawaiian style, or a Macau, is how you say fish hook in Hawaiian. A little bit different than Maui's fish hook. The design is going to be a little bit different, a little bit smaller, but same concept. I was really excited to make this piece. I did actually have a couple design changes, as well as a couple, I don't know if they're mistakes, but partway through on certain aspects, I just didn't like the way it was going, and I think it ended up turning out better as a result of that. So the first step here, initial step, was I was just drawing out the rough layout, and then I cut it out on the bandsaw. One of the things that you might notice is that one of the spikes, or one of the barbs, is missing, and so my plan there was I was going to inset a antler as part of the barb. That's just one of my previous images. And then the other thing that I noticed as I cut it out is that I had a large knot or rotted section of wood that I needed to remove. That just wouldn't work. And so I thought about doing a couple things to fix it up. What I ended up deciding to do was filling it with a clear epoxy. I've been watching a lot of epoxy river tables and a few different channels that I really like, and so I thought I'd give it a try and fill that up. The other thing that I ended up doing later on, and you'll see that, is the proportions on the backside of the fish hook. I didn't really like the wood that I have, the coil wood here, just wasn't quite wide enough, and so I ended up cutting a section off that. But what I did here is I just wrapped, after I got it cleaned out and ready for pour, I wrapped the entire thing with painter's tape. That's just to keep the epoxy from spilling out. And then in addition to the painter's tape, to kind of keep the epoxy in place, I also put painter's tape on my desk. I do that oftentimes when I glue, just so that I prevent it sticking to my desk and becoming a hassle to get off. The epoxy that I'm using here is a really low viscous epoxy. I chose to use this. It has a lot longer setting time, but I wanted to use it because I wanted it to fill in all of the crevices really well, and this will also, all the bubbles will rise to the surface with this. And so for that reason, it was just a better option than like a 5-minute epoxy. So I had to let it sit for, I think I let it sit for actually a week. Cure time is really only like 24 hours, but I wanted to make sure that it was good and solid, because I was going to be grinding and sanding on it, just shaping with like I would with the rest of the piece. So I wanted to make sure that it really cured all the way through, and it looked like it really did. It was feeling really solid, and I was really pleased with how that turned out. So the next steps here is I'm just going to be doing some basic shaping. I'm not going to take the shaping too far, because I wanted to start working on the components for the inset here. And so this is just a deer antler. I think it's a whitetail. I got a set of antlers from my brother-in-law a long time ago, and I've used them piece by piece, and this was kind of the last little piece I had. And when I got commissioned to make this club, they kind of gave me just a creative decision as to how I wanted to take it, and so immediately this was one of my ideas. I wanted to use the bone as part of the inlay, just because I've seen a lot of artists do that. They'll have bone mixed with wood, and I really like how it looks. But I ended up not liking it on this piece for a couple of reasons. One is the antler bone really wasn't that large. It's a smaller antler, and the proportions just wasn't, I didn't like it. So you can see there, I got the inset in, I got it fitting well, and I kept working with it, but I just wasn't liking the overall aesthetic pretty much the entire time that I was shaping on it. I kept going back and forth as to what maybe I can do to make it better. The other thing I didn't like is where that inset was. It just wasn't very strong. I really needed to go deeper, but because it's a smaller antler, the deeper I go with that, the thinner the exposed antler is, and as I was working through it, I just didn't like it. And so what I ended up doing, which I felt was kind of a risk, but I needed to do it anyway, is I ended up cutting off that entire front section that has that antler. And you'll see that here in just a minute. So after I got to this point, I let it sit for about a day, and maybe a couple days. I just wasn't liking the overall feel. I didn't like the back. You can see right there on the back end where it kind of goes flat. That's just where the wood wasn't large enough. I ran out of material. And so I didn't like the aesthetic of the bone. I didn't like the back. I wasn't liking any of it. And so what I ended up doing is I cut off that section there, cut it off really clean. And then I found another piece of koa that had a very contrasting color to it. So also a very curly koa. In fact, you can see the curl there without even sanding on it. But I really liked the contrast. And so in addition to that, I cut off the back section here so that I could put the remainder of that koa on the back here. And so that way I'd have contrast all the way through. And it also gave me more material on the back so that I could really get the proportions a lot better. I just used some wood glue. This is just a professional setting wood glue. I think I bought it at Lowe's or Home Depot, I can't remember. And I let each one set for overnight before moving to the next one. So it was about 2.5 days before I took off the clamps and started working on it. Once I cut it out, I cut it out kind of large, and you can see that here it kind of bulges. I did that on purpose. I was planning on cleaning up that and fixing up that edge. It's subtractive work, and so the risk is I take too much off and I either have to glue something back on again or figure something else out. So it's always better to start with a little bit more than you're going to need and then work your way down to it than it is to cut too much off and be stuck. I really started liking the direction that it was going. The other thing too that I was struggling with is where I was going to put the teeth. I didn't really have a set plan. I'd done one of these similar style fish hook clubs in the past, but I like each of my pieces to be unique, even if the styles are similar. And so I didn't want to completely copy the previous style, and with the size of the barb on that first hook being larger now that it had its own piece of wood, the proportions wise, it didn't look right to put teeth on the front. And so what I ended up doing was I decided I'd have those first two barbs just come to kind of like a knife edge, and then I'll be putting tiger shark teeth all along the back end, and it actually worked really well. All I'm doing here is I'm cleaning up with a rasp the internal cut that I did with the bandsaw, and I'll also be shaping it out. And once I get all the deep cuts out, I'll switch to the 150 grit. So this is 150 grit sandpaper, and I'll continue to kind of shape it as well as start sanding it and smoothing it around. I'm going to be sanding the entire thing to 800 grit. I'm not going to do that at this point in time. Really what I'm doing here is just kind of cleaning up the interior, and I'm doing that so that as I continue shaping my edge work, I'm not going to be losing any of those boundaries. And what I mean by that is I'm going to have a taper along both edges there, and I want that taper to have the same width. But if I don't clean out that center and get it to shape first, if I do the taper first, when I go to clean out the center, my taper is going to have different widths at different sections. It's just going to look off, and I'll have to re-put in the taper, which really wouldn't be a big deal. I just thought it'd be a little bit smoother of a process to clean out the center part first and then work on the taper. Here I'm just sanding down. I'm going to be sanding this down first to 320 before I put in the teeth. As I was going through it, I kind of also wanted to do a few other things. You'll see those later on in the video. But the parts that I was really excited about is the contrast. You can really see the contrast between the different koa woods going from the barb on the front end and the barb on the back. Once I got this to about 320, I got up my chisel so that I could clean up the connection points between where the barb comes down and then goes back up around. I'm not doing a whole lot of chisel work here. I'm just kind of taking my time to make it as clean as I can with that connection there, and then doing the same thing on both ends. And so I flipped over, do it again. You can actually see right there though that where the epoxy filled in, man, it filled in perfectly. That slow setting, low viscous epoxy really worked well. I think it's crystal clear epoxy is the one that I used. I ended up buying I think a gallon worth of that some time ago, and I've used it a lot of times for a lot of projects. It's worked really well. So here I'm putting in a taper on this first one just because it's a larger barb, and then once I finish that, I'm going to go ahead and put in the groove for the shark teeth. So what I'm using here for the groove is a tungsten carbide bit on my Dremel, and I kind of just pull it across. So one of the techniques that I've kind of learned with that is just laying it on its side and kind of pulling it versus being straight up and down. It makes it easier for pulling a straight line. As I was working on it, I kind of didn't like how much open space there was on this back end, and so I decided to put in some inlays. Now these are just wooden dowels. I think they're pine, I can't remember. I just wanted a lighter wood so there would be some more contrast between the darker koa wood and then those lighter circular inlays. What I did is I marked where I wanted them on one side, and then I drilled a straight hole all the way through to act as a guide. I'm actually not going to have these go all the way through. They're only going to inlay about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch deep. The reason why I did that is a long time ago I put a large inlay all the way through on a piece, and I don't have a drill press, and those bits that I was using to cut out those circular inlay, they kind of will walk on you, and so it's really hard to get a straight perpendicular cut. And so I cut all the way through first with a small drill just to be a guide on both sides, and then I put inlays in on both sides, and then I just put them in with some wood glue, and then I mixed the wood glue around the edges with some koa sawdust that came actually from this piece. I learned that from a channel. They were doing that when they put in inlays, and it just made for a cleaner connection. You can see on those circular inlays, it's really clean all the way around. There's the gaps get kind of hidden by the mixing in that wood glue with a little bit of sawdust. I ended up needing to set the teeth in two different sections. I did that back section first and then this top section. I did that just because the gradient, they would slide all over the place if I tried to do them all at once. Once I get that done, I'm going to go ahead and put in the holes. I'm going to follow the same pattern that I do for almost all of my pieces. I first draw out the holes, and then I punch a small pin in as a guide that helps prevent my drill bit from walking on me. I can do it without that, but it goes a lot smoother and it's a lot faster to do it with those little guide holes in there first. I started doing that probably about 6 months ago. Another small thing that I picked up while watching another YouTube channel there, but for metalworking. This last step here is I'm just going to be finishing up and sanding where I tapped in those holes. I'm going to finish sanding up with this 320, which is what I have there. And then once I finish up with the 320, I'm going to go ahead and sand with, I think I sanded with the 400, and then I finished with an 800. I left out the 400 just because it's kind of boring. It's the same thing over and over. So all I'm doing here is, again, I've finished shaping. I'm just doing some finishing sanding work. In between each sanding session, I actually hit it with an air to clean off the piece and get rid of all of that dust, and then I keep sanding. It just helps, makes the process a little bit smoother. I don't go through as much sandpaper as previous. I was unbelievably excited for this step. I always love putting the oil on the pieces. You get to see the true color of the wood start to come out. But because of the contrast and the different koa woods that I have on here, I was very excited, and it did not disappoint. You can see just an absolutely beautiful curl coming off that first barb, and then the curl along the whole piece. And then I really liked the contrast. The tongue oil did darken up the inlays a little bit more than I wanted them to, but that's because they were end grain, the dowels. If they weren't an end grain, then they would have stayed a little bit lighter, but that's okay. It ended up looking really good. I was very pleased with it anyway, and so I didn't mind it too much. The epoxy section where I'd filled in that wood rot that I'd pulled out, that looked absolutely beautiful. There was no bubbles at all in it, which was great, and so it just looked really clean. Overall, I was very happy with the piece. There is a section here that got left out. I don't know if my camera didn't work or I forgot to hit record, but I did lash the handle as well. And so I did a 4-ply twist with the cordage, and then I lashed the entire handle. And you'll see the lashing here in just a minute on the finished piece. But overall, the piece worked out really well. I was really pleased with it. The curl on the koa wood is absolutely beautiful. It goes the entire length of the piece. I almost didn't want to wrap it because it was so beautiful. But the wrapping, it's a fish hook, so it's that's just part of the design. I needed to add it. Before I wrapped it though, I went ahead and lashed the teeth. The teeth that I'm using here are tiger shark teeth. I did do a slight gradient, and so the teeth closer towards the handle on the backside are smaller, and then I use larger teeth as it comes up and around. The tiger shark teeth are pretty sharp teeth. They're the only teeth that I know of that have that distinctive shape. The other common teeth that I'll use is bull shark teeth, which are a more triangular shape. But the tiger shark just fits perfect with the wooden barbs that are already going back. I really wanted to test this piece, but I was a little bit nervous too. It is built to be a show piece. It's not one really that I meant to hit someone over the head with. But it would definitely do some damage if you did. I didn't want to snap the barb or any of those sections, just because the wood grain is going straight up and down, and so that'd be kind of a weak point there where the arch comes around. Here's the finished piece, and you can see the lashing there. I'm going to do 2 shots, one inside my shop and then one outside to get the natural lighting. You can really see the curl on this. Absolutely loved it. Let me know in the comments if you think it turned out better, or if you would have liked to have seen it with the antlered deer instead of the piece of koa that I tacked onto it. If you have any suggestions on doing maybe a better job with the epoxy. Overall, I was very pleased with how it turned out. The only thing I would have liked to have done is maybe test it, but again, last thing I wanted to do is cause some damage on it that I wouldn't be able to fix. The piece of koa I used for this was a fairly expensive piece, and so I didn't want to damage that piece there. But weight-wise, handling-wise, it was absolutely perfect. I loved it. I do have a lot of exciting new videos coming out. This last week I didn't have a video out just for the Christmas season. Hope everyone had a great holiday season. I ended up getting some arrowheads from someone that watches one of the subscribers to my video, so I'm really excited about that. I'm going to be making a video on those, comparing those arrowheads to the ones that I made out of shark teeth. And then I have a couple other koa wood knife designs that I'm going to be building, and so I'm very excited for all the future content. Mahalo everyone that's watched. I greatly appreciate it. If you liked it, leave a comment, subscribe. It really helps out, and I'll see you next time. Aloha.